HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Religion of Whiteness, How Racism Distorts Christian Faith, by Michael O. Emerson and Glenn E. Bracey II, read by Tom Parks. Publisher's Note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to figures present in the print and e-book formats of the book. Preface. The story we share in this book is a difficult one. It will be welcomed by some and rejected by others. We do not write this book with puffed-up chests. We do not sit on a high horse or in some isolated academic tower. We struggle to live in the very midst of life in our neighborhoods and in congregations just like those of whom we write. We thus write this book in a spirit of humility, attempting as best we can to understand a significant and long-standing reality. We are flawed human beings like the people we study. We hope for better days, and hope, we have learned, is perhaps the single most important concept for living life. We all want to be loved. We want to belong. We want to matter. Yet because life is guaranteed to bring struggles, no matter who we are, we must have hope. We must have hope that things will get better, that no matter what gloom we face, brightness will win the day. The journey to write this book has been like none other we have faced. Obstacles, delays, doubts, sickness, distractions, relational issues and challenges. Unless people encounter this book and discuss its arguments and findings, it was all for naught. So, if you listen to this book, we say, thank you. If you find ideas here to use in your own thinking and living, we celebrate. If you find work here to critique and improve upon and do exactly that, we celebrate. To get ever closer to truth and to move toward a world that actually finds ways to exist together fairly are goals worth the struggle. May we extend grace to one another as we stagger toward those goals. Chapter 1. The Issue. Race has always been central to the American story. For centuries, it has remained the central fault line along which American society is divided. And while many have fervently hoped that racism and racial injustice would recede from American life, the events of the past few years have dealt a near fatal blow to such hopes. Why won't racism and racial injustice just go away? Why have efforts to eradicate racism failed? Others have gone to great lengths to answer these questions. In this book, we propose a novel argument. They won't go away because race is tangled up with another crucial marker of American identity: religion. That is, race has become religionized in the United States. It has taken on transcendent qualities. But because we tend to study race and religion separately, we have missed this crucial fact, and thus have grossly underestimated the challenge we face as a nation. In this book, we aim to offer a new way of looking at race and religion in America by bringing both into focus simultaneously, revealing how they interact with and reinforce each other. We argue, and test the argument with data, that racism and racial injustice have not receded from American life, because they are, in good part, the life-giving force of a dominant group's religion. Put simply, we cannot understand racial injustice without understanding the religion that feeds on racial injustice. As the noted Yale scholar Willie Jennings has argued, race in America is a form of religious faith, and we will never be able to understand or address it with the necessary knowledge, energy, or commitment until we comprehend its true architecture. The goal of this book is to understand that architecture, in the hope that such understanding can be the first step toward lasting change. The contrast. On a bright, crisp, and colorful Saturday morning in October 2020, we set out by car from Chicago, Illinois to Delavan, Wisconsin, a journey of about 100 miles. Fall had arrived after a long summer of racial tumult. The presidential election was on the horizon and on everyone's minds. A close friend of ours, a white member of an overwhelmingly white megachurch, had sent us a link to a sermon from another predominantly white church on the East Coast. He had prefaced it by saying something like, "I wanted you to know the issues that matter to me and my community." A long car ride was an excellent time to listen to the sermon, which was well over an hour long. So we tuned in. We'd later watch it on video as well. It was entitled The Election Sermon, and it focused on how Christians should think about issues facing the nation and how they should vote to be consistent with their faith. The pastor gave a repeated challenge. "Wake up!" He began, "I cannot be silent. I will not be silent, and neither should you. America needs to wake up, and it starts with the Church of Jesus Christ." There was a great deal of clapping from the congregation. He continued, "This is a battle. This is a war. This is not a game. It is a spiritual battle that we are facing for the heart and soul of America and for the heart and soul of the next generation. I have never felt as passionate for and concerned about America as I am today. We, as the Church of Jesus Christ, are God's restraining force in the world today against evil." The pastor then went on to explain what the proper purpose of government is and how Christians should think about it. Look around at the issues of our day and ask yourself which policies and procedures, as put forth by the two main parties in America, will accomplish God's purpose of government, cultivating the good and punishing the evil. We have to look at all these different issues that we are surrounded by, and there's a lot. We have to ask ourselves, how can we do our best to look at policies and procedures separated from personality contests and recognize what policies and procedures best come closest to, most represent our convictions with a biblical worldview, in order for the government to advance the good and to punish the evil. Getting down to specifics, he began naming what he believes are the most important issues facing the country, and, in each case, which political party is more in line with the biblical worldview. He asked the congregation to play a little game he called Guess the Party Platform. He named 5 issues, read both parties' official statements, and asked the congregation which was closer to a biblical worldview. As our friend suggested, the issues the pastor chose to highlight are important for understanding what matters to this community. They are not necessarily the issues that turn up at the top of polls showing what voters care about. The pastor named them in order: religious freedom, marriage and sexuality, Israel, life, and the economy. But he didn't just name them. He chose sides. The Democratic Party doesn't care about religious freedom. They seek to destroy traditional marriage and sexual morality. Donald Trump showed who was Israel's biggest supporter when he moved the American embassy to Jerusalem. Donald Trump is the most pro-life president of all time. And on the economy, the least obviously religious issue on his list, he launched into a stem-winder. A biblical worldview, he argued, is one that values individual hard work and the willingness to be kind to the poor, but only voluntarily. Helping the poor is not the government's role. The Democratic platform's use of buzzwords, such as shared prosperity, he claimed, is contrary to the biblical worldview. That's political speak. It's socialism. It's the redistribution of wealth. He went on. The Bible doesn't teach socialism. You know what the Bible teaches? The Bible teaches that hard work will be rewarded. And the Bible teaches that we should also be mindful of the poor among us, because that also will be rewarded if you're kind to the poor, but not redistribute the wealth. That's unbiblical. Much clapping. In Proverbs chapter 13, verse 4, it says that, "But those who work hard will prosper." And Proverbs chapter 22, verse 9, "He who has a generous eye will be blessed if he gives of his bread to the poor." That's the combination that works in America and around the world. That's God's design. It's not redistributing the wealth. Despite noting early in the sermon that the past months had been exhausting, because of the pandemic, of course, but also because of racial unrest roiling the country, there were only 2 mentions of race in the talk. Both were references to African Americans who personally told the pastor that he is right, that he is being truly biblical, that all lives matter, that black people overwhelmingly vote Democratic because they don't think about it. It's just cultural and what is expected by other black people, and that if he just keeps teaching the Bible, the sin of racism will be eradicated because God will change the hearts and minds of the people. In short, the issues he identified as important are the same issues that are important to black people, at least those who understand Scripture and can move beyond their cultural encapsulation. He concluded, "Listen to me. I am going to speak truth to you. If you are a lifelong Democrat, your party has left you. Your party has left you. That ship has sailed." Clapping. It's true. He went on to emphatically say he could not and would not vote for the Democratic Party candidates. "I cannot, will not, cannot, will not." The congregation erupted in cheers and shouts of encouragement. The clarity of the sermon was inescapable. What is Christian, what is biblical, what is right had been laid bare, just as what is unchristian, what is unbiblical, and what is wrong had been made clear. Republicans are the former, Democrats are the latter. Not surprisingly, 2 weeks later, white Christians overwhelmingly voted Republican for president and in most every other race across the nation. By the time we set out for the return trip to Chicago that evening, the weather had turned blustery and cold, with fallen leaves swirling in the darkness. Once again, a friend, this one African American, had some recommended listening for us. A new episode of the podcast, In the Light. And once again, we used our 100 miles of car captivity to listen in. Hosted by Dr. Anita Phillips, an African American Christian counselor, Instagrammer with well over 100,000 followers, and podcaster, the episode was entitled Betrayal. Phillips opened the podcast by telling listeners that the episode would focus on racial division within the church. She had been receiving an ever-growing number of requests from African Americans asking for prayer and counseling regarding the white-led, racially mixed churches they attend, and the completely absent or near-absent response to their lived experiences as Black Americans. And the most heartbreaking elements of those talks have centered on the spiritual damage they have suffered. She then introduced the first of her 2 guests, a young African-American woman who had, until recently, been a worship leader in a white-led, racially diverse congregation. The guest, who grew up in a black church, was introduced as anonymous to protect her from backlash. She was asked to describe her experience in her most recent white-led church. The guest began by saying she continually noted she was not treated with gentleness or with grace. She said when she acted too black, as defined by the white leadership and members, she was told they find it distracting. She also said they continually questioned my character, saying I was calling attention away from where the focus should be. These repeated occurrences led her to question herself and her faith. She reported experiencing 9 separate anxiety attacks during her first year at the church. She became unsure of who she was or what she should be doing. Earlier that year, Ahmaud Arbery, an African-American man out for a jog, was murdered by 2 white men. The young woman said that this event had changed her, making her fearful for her safety. I was running 3 miles every morning, and I stopped being able to run. I was eating only once every 48 hours and sleeping maybe 2 hours a night. But at church, things seemed to be going along as usual, as if nothing had happened and the world had not changed. And I realized, oh yes, your white world hasn't changed. Everything is normal for you. That realization crushed her. It meant she and her white parishioners really were not in this struggle together. While the white congregants were going about their lives unchanged, the black community was grieving and hurting. This disconnect was deeply disturbing to the young woman. During this period, she had a severe anxiety attack while singing on stage with the worship team. It was embarrassing, and it felt like no one understood why I was losing it. After the service, there was a debrief meeting of the worship team. Still trying desperately to hold it together, she spent much of the meeting looking down at her phone. A short while later, she texted the worship leader to apologize for being out of it during the meeting, noting that she was experiencing an anxiety attack. Rather than show any concern, the worship leader simply told her perhaps she would do better if she were not on her phone during such meetings. She was devastated. She told Phillips that she began to spiral, feeling disoriented and confused. She realized that people at the church did not have her back. She felt isolated. Then came the murder of George Floyd. In an excruciating video that shocked the nation, Floyd was shown lying on the ground, pleading for mercy, as a white police officer kneeled on his neck. The officer's knee remained there for more than 9 minutes as Floyd's breath weakened. Soon, he was dead. Shortly thereafter, the young woman's church hosted a previously scheduled community night. She hoped desperately that the George Floyd atrocity would be discussed, that the pain would be acknowledged. It wasn't. There was no mention whatsoever. I hit a point where I said, "Okay, I can't do this anymore." She soon left the church, as did at least 8 other African Americans. She reflected on her time at the church. When they want diversity and representation in the choir, we are valued. But the moment we use the same voices to talk about Trump or other issues, then those voices need to be silenced immediately, and we are no longer welcomed in this space. The moment that I started discussing, "Hey, this is racist behavior," it was, "Hey, you cannot be part of teams anymore." She went on, "I spent the past 5 years serving and submitting. I had the hope that we can talk about and learn from this, the events of that summer. I was brewing with hope. God wants to deal with this. But then it gets smacked down by this ancient principality of white supremacy. So many people are submitted to this principality. I am a person of hope. I wanted fiercely to stay. I wanted to be there when we all got it. But in therapy, I realized the cost was too high to my health. Now that I have left, I am ostracized, and it hurts." Phillips asked her how she was doing now. "Spiritually, I don't want to talk about Jesus or church." Crying, "I know what I know. The truth is unchanging, but I don't have a desire to interact. I don't want to go to a church. I don't want it at all." After saying goodbye to the guest, Phillips addressed the audience directly. "We need to name this type of trauma," she told them. "It needs to be given a language." She noted that what is happening is something beyond racial trauma, something beyond religious trauma, and something beyond their overlap. It is a unique, egregious phenomenon. It is what she calls betrayal trauma. Taken from the work of psychologist Jennifer Fried, it can be defined thusly. Betrayal trauma occurs when people or institutions on which a person depends significantly violate that person's trust or well-being. The degree to which a negative event represents a betrayal by a trusted, needed other will influence the way in which that event is processed and remembered. Because so many African Americans are so deeply spiritual, Phillips told her audience, to be racially and religiously traumatized constitutes a betrayal by a needed other. We need each other. Here where race, religion, and betrayal overlap, we find the language for this deep pain shaking too many of us. The trauma is real and worthy to be given voice. What does it mean? In the course of one round trip on one October day, we experienced two distinct visions of race and faith in American life. They hardly encapsulate the entire range of views on these subjects, but they do reveal the vast gulf separating people who ostensibly share the same faith. But this book is not about the gulf. It is about the deep damage it is doing to human beings, warping people, communities, and the nation. It is about what we describe as the grand betrayal perpetrated by many white Christians, overwhelmingly concerned with their own within-group issues and position, against Christians of other racial and ethnic backgrounds. It is about how and why many white Christians are rejecting their Christian family and the severe consequences that follow for the entire nation. This is not a blame game book. This is a book about naming reality, the architecture of race and religion, with the hope of changing it. We will explore the gravity of the betrayal and ask why so many white Christians engage in it. Our answer is that many white people have an additional faith that serves to distort their Christian faith, what we call the religion of whiteness. We will not argue, as some have, that white Christianity is different from other forms of Christianity. Nor will we claim that white Christianity has racial prejudice or racism embedded within it. Various powerful metaphors have been offered for this view, from the two going hand in hand, to racism being part of Christianity's DNA, to it being baked into the cake, to faith serving as a parasitic host. And we will not be making the claim sometimes made by still others, that Christianity is merely a cover for a political movement. These claims, while they call attention to a vitally important issue, do not quite capture what we believe is actually occurring. Rather, we argue that most white Christians in the United States, our best estimate based on empirical data is 2/3, are faithfully following what amounts to, in effect, a competing religion, or sect, or creed. This religion, the religion of whiteness, distorts people's Christian commitments and raises race to creedal status over other aspects of historical Christianity. Once we come to see this competing religion for what it is, things that might have seemed confusing begin to make perfect sense. The seemingly endless contradictions disappear, and we begin to see racial injustice in a whole new light, which is, hopefully, a step toward overcoming it. In short, we argue in this book that the problem of racial injustice in the United States cannot be addressed until we understand that we are not merely dealing with interpersonal racism or material racism or Christian nationalism or the Christian right. These all matter in vitally important ways, and we take them seriously. But we argue that something even larger is occurring, and that something larger, that race is religionized and how it is so, must be understood before progress can be made. What comes next? We begin by exploring the betrayal as it is described by Christians of color. The stories we heard were remarkably consistent and incredibly powerful. The openness of those we interviewed and of Christians from previous eras paints a clear picture of hurt and confusion and the real price paid by some just for living in America. In Chapter 3, we seek to understand why such realities occur. Building upon theory, we propose the answer is the religion of whiteness, a powerful intruder within portions of American Christianity with many millions of followers. This religion has its own unique beliefs, practices, sacred symbols, and organizations. What is more, this religion affects more than just churches. It drives the nation's politics, divides families, and is especially harmful to communities of color. In chapters 4 through 6, using national survey data, in-depth interviews, and focus group results over several years of study, we both test our explanation and reveal how the religion of whiteness distorts the practice of traditional Christianity for millions of Americans. We find that the religion of whiteness has two distinct but mutually constitutive groups, what we call the white veil and the white might groups. These two groups work to defend and uphold the religion of whiteness, at great cost to any who do not follow the religion, including white non-followers. In the concluding chapter, we consider the meaning of the book's argument and findings. Recognizing the realities of spiritualizing race and the formation of an entire religion from it is necessary for healing America's vexing racial divisions and inequities. If people and their organizations hope for racial justice and unity, and desire to navigate the very many contentious issues of the nation, they must confront the distorting power of the religion of whiteness. We conclude with a suggested path for doing exactly that. Chapter 2. Betrayal Trauma. Stories of Rejection. The U.S. Army is large and complex, with layer upon layer of hierarchy. In modern times, the Army's most fundamental combat unit is the brigade, which can range in size from 1,000 to over 5,000 soldiers. We will zero in on the 49th Brigade Combat Team led by Colonel Williams, which received a special assignment. Colonel Williams is a seasoned military leader, having fought in 3 overseas wars, and now he had been called upon to lead his soldiers on a mission to protect U.S. interests from a threat. It was a risky mission, given the instability in the region and the high stakes. In fact, Colonel Williams was worried. He knew that in order for the mission to succeed, it would have to go nearly perfectly. His troops would need to be at peak performance, working together with unified mission and purpose. Colonel Williams's brigade is organized into 5 battalions, Battalion 1 through Battalion 5, each with 1,000 soldiers and each commanded by a lieutenant colonel. Shortly after learning of the brigade's mission, Colonel Williams called a meeting of his lieutenant colonels. He described the mission, its many challenges, and the need to be fully in unison if they were going to accomplish their goal. Colonel Williams and his lieutenant colonel spent several days planning their strategy, and, given its importance, sequenced the plan down to the minute, assigning in detail tasks for each squadron and platoon within each battalion. Once they had finished their strategic planning, they then made backup plans to be activated should any steps along the way not go as planned. With just 2 weeks before they were to travel overseas to carry out the mission, training was intense and long. Soldiers were repeatedly led through enactments of real-life scenarios and tested for their ability to follow orders and make real-time adjustments on the ground as the situation dictated. They went through the strategy over and over and carried it out in trial runs. Thousands of soldiers, through their intense training, came ever closer to working in unison, anticipating each other's moves. The soldiers were nervous, but given their plans and preparation, they seemed quietly confident as they boarded the Army planes to fly overseas. The mission would begin as soon as they landed, so both sleeping and preparing during the flight were imperative. The flight was 12 hours total, in many ways a short time, in other ways an eternity, especially given the growing nervousness the soldiers were experiencing, since most of them were about to engage in the first real combat of their lives. Several members of Battalion 5 began talking to each other during the flight. Perhaps it was the nerves, or perhaps it was ego, but the conversation among them began to focus on whether the mission could succeed and on the imminent risk to their lives. They also asked, if the mission were successful, whether they would receive their share of the recognition, because, in their minds, their battalion had been assigned the least glamorous, most dangerous work of any of the battalions. They began to question the intentions of the other battalions and their commanders. As can happen, groupthink quickly arose around the idea that the battalions, instead of working together, were in competition with each other. The soldiers in Battalion 5 began pointing out other instances in which they perceived members of other battalions being untrustworthy or reaching for recognition at Battalion 5's expense. No one is quite sure how or exactly when it happened, but the soldiers of Battalion 5 determined sometime before landing that they would not follow the intended strategy, which was to lead the charge once they arrived at the battle site. Instead, they would begin to lead the charge, then break off in different directions in the thick forest, leaving the other battalions to follow and take the brunt of the initial attacks. As the other battalions advanced, they would then
Sample complete. Ready to continue?